Elizabeth Short was born on July 29, 1924, in Boston, Massachusetts. Her family background was far from glamorous, and her childhood was marked by hardship. She was the third of 5 daughters born to George and Phoebe Short. Her father, George, abandoned the family when Elizabeth was just a child. This left her mother, Phoebe, to raise the 5 daughters on her own. The absence of a father figure in her life created a difficult environment for Elizabeth, who, at a young age, had to learn to cope with both emotional and financial struggles. When Elizabeth was around 15 years old, things took another turn. Her father, George, mysteriously disappeared, which made it even harder for Phoebe to manage the household and provide for her children. Elizabeth and her sisters had to deal with growing up without the support of their father, and the emotional weight of their family's situation was something that Elizabeth would carry with her throughout her life. To make matters worse, Elizabeth also battled with severe asthma, a condition that often kept her from fully participating in physical activities. This illness, combined with the struggles of growing up in a broken home, seemed to shape Elizabeth's personality and her sense of self. Despite these hardships, Elizabeth was determined to make something of her life. By the time she was in her late teens, she moved to California, hoping to start fresh and build a future in the entertainment industry. Like many young women drawn to Hollywood, she wanted to find fame and escape from the rough background she came from. However, despite her beauty, which was often described as stunning with dark brown hair and deep, expressive eyes, Elizabeth's career in Hollywood never took off. Her beauty was striking, and people around her often commented on her appearance. She stood at about 5'5", with delicate features that made her stand out. But Elizabeth's hopes of becoming a movie star were never realized. She worked a series of low-paying jobs, mostly as a waitress, but nothing seemed to lead her to the fame she dreamed of. Even though her career in Hollywood wasn't successful, Elizabeth still found herself surrounded by men, some who were wealthy or well-connected. But these relationships never gave her the life she was hoping for. Her time in California was marked by a series of difficult living conditions. Elizabeth moved from one place to another, staying with friends or even in short-term rentals. Though she had a dream of becoming an actress, she never managed to make it past small roles or appearances. In fact, her time in Los Angeles was marked by a sense of searching for meaning and success, but without the rewards she longed for. Ultimately, Elizabeth became one of many young women who came to California hoping for fame, but whose dreams were dashed by the harsh reality of the entertainment industry. In 1943, at the age of 19, Elizabeth made the bold decision to move to Southern California, specifically to the glamorous city of Los Angeles, in the hopes of starting a new chapter of her life. Like so many others, she was drawn by the allure of Hollywood, the idea of fame, and the possibility of becoming an actress. However, Elizabeth's path in Los Angeles was not an easy one. She lived in various places while trying to find stability, from boarding houses to temporary apartments. Money was always tight, and Elizabeth often struggled to make ends meet. To support herself, she worked as a waitress and took on other low-wage jobs. These jobs, however, were never enough to offer her the success or recognition she dreamed of. Her experience was common among many young women who flocked to Hollywood in the 1940s. They were often caught in the web of ambition, but faced with harsh realities when the bright lights of Hollywood turned out to be far more elusive than they imagined. Elizabeth's beauty did not go unnoticed in the city of stars. She often attracted the attention of wealthy men, some of whom were well-connected in Hollywood circles. Her dark, mysterious beauty seemed to captivate those around her, and Elizabeth was known to have relationships with men who were either influential or wealthy. However, these relationships didn't lead to lasting love or a career breakthrough. Some reports suggested she had romantic involvement with men who promised her opportunities, but these promises rarely materialized. Hollywood at the time was a city of dreams, but also of broken promises. Many young women, like Elizabeth, came to Los Angeles with hopes of finding fame and fortune, but instead they faced disappointment and heartache. Elizabeth's story, in many ways, was not unique. She was just one of many young women trying to make it in an unforgiving industry. However, unlike many others who left or faded into obscurity, Elizabeth would remain forever linked to Hollywood history. Not for any films she made, but for the violent way her life came to an end. On the morning of January 15, 1947, something horrifying was discovered in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. A woman named Betty Bersinger, while walking with her daughter, noticed what appeared to be a mannequin lying in a vacant lot. It was strange, though, because the figure looked unusually lifelike. As she got closer, the shocking reality set in. It was not a mannequin, but a human body. This was no ordinary crime scene. The body was that of a woman who had been brutalized in a horrific and deliberate manner. The body had been severed at the waist, and the victim's organs were drained of blood. It was clear from the gruesome state of the body that the murder was extremely violent. The woman's face had been mutilated. Her mouth had been cut into a ghastly smile, giving her an expression that was more macabre than anything seen in real life. The lack of blood at the scene suggested that the victim had been killed elsewhere and then placed in this empty lot, as if the killer had tried to avoid leaving any trace of what had happened. The police quickly responded to the scene and cordoned off the area. They confirmed the body's identity. It was Elizabeth Short, who had been missing for several days. The news spread quickly, and the authorities began to investigate, though the case seemed impossible to crack. The brutality of the crime, the shocking nature of the victim's injuries, and the complete lack of leads made it seem like a crime unlike any other. The media, of course, picked up on the story quickly. The press sensationalized the details of the crime, focusing on the horror of the mutilation and the mystery surrounding Elizabeth's life and death. The name Black Dahlia was coined, perhaps to give a sense of dark glamour to the story. The public became obsessed with the details, and questions about Elizabeth Short's life, her dreams, and her connections to Hollywood began to swirl. This fascination, however, only deepened the mystery and made the investigation all the more difficult for the police, as the killer seemed to enjoy the media attention and may have been taunting investigators. The discovery of Elizabeth Short's body led to one of the most intense investigations in Los Angeles history. Detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, were assigned to the case, but they were quickly confronted with a baffling set of challenges. First and foremost, there was very little evidence to work with. The crime scene was eerily clean. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, and no immediate clues to indicate who might have been responsible for such a brutal murder. This suggested that Elizabeth had likely been killed elsewhere, and her body had been carefully moved to the vacant lot. The gruesome nature of the crime led many investigators to believe that the killer was someone with a personal motive or an intense emotional connection to the victim. The mutilation of the body was particularly telling. It seemed to go beyond a simple murder and was more of a violent, almost ritualistic act. The killer's apparent need to disfigure the face and body left investigators with the impression that this was someone who was either angry or disturbed. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was the appearance of several letters sent to the media and the police. These letters, postmarked just days after the body was discovered, were written in a strange, cryptic style. Some contained personal items belonging to Elizabeth Short, like her business cards and an address book, leading investigators to believe that the murderer was toying with them. The letters were filled with dark and unsettling content, and the killer seemed to relish the attention the case was receiving. It became clear to the police that they were dealing with someone who wanted to make a statement or prove their intelligence. The letters suggested a level of narcissism or arrogance, as if the killer were confident they could evade capture. This added another layer of complexity to the case, as the killer seemed to enjoy being in control, watching as the media and police struggled to solve the crime. Despite the police's best efforts, no solid leads emerged, and the case began to feel like an insurmountable puzzle that no one could solve. Over the years, many people have come forward with theories about who may have been responsible for the murder of Elizabeth Short, but the truth remains elusive. Numerous individuals were suspected of being involved in the crime, and there are a variety of theories that continue to intrigue both law enforcement and the public. However, despite the many suspects, no one has ever been definitively linked to the murder, and the case remains unsolved. One of the earliest and most notable suspects in the case was Dr. George Hodel, a prominent doctor in Los Angeles. George Hodel was a well-known figure, but he was also surrounded by controversy. His reputation was that of a secretive and mysterious man, and there were several reports over the years suggesting that he was involved in questionable activities, including a number of alleged affairs and scandals. Hodel's name became widely associated with the Black Dahlia case after investigators discovered that he had been a patient of a doctor who had attended to Elizabeth Short in the months before her death. The connection between George Hodel and Elizabeth Short was tenuous at best, but suspicions about his involvement in the murder persisted for many years. At the time of the crime, Hodel lived in a large, secluded house in Hollywood, not far from where Elizabeth had been staying. Some of the circumstantial evidence linking him to the case was strong enough to warrant a thorough investigation, but despite years of probing, no concrete evidence ever emerged that could definitively prove he was involved. Years later, Steve Hodel, George's son, took up the investigation into his father's possible involvement in the murder. Steve became a detective himself and spent decades researching the case, convinced that his father was the killer. He published several books about his findings and theories, but while many of his arguments were compelling, none of them provided irrefutable proof. Steve Hodel believes that his father's secretive and disturbing behavior was linked to the crime, and he points to a number of clues that he believes suggest George was the murderer. However, these theories remain speculative, and the case remains open. Apart from George Hodel, there have been other suspects as well, though many of these individuals had far less direct involvement with the crime. Some of the early theories focused on romantic relationships that Elizabeth may have had before her death. Elizabeth was known to have been in several brief romantic entanglements, including relationships with men who were older and more powerful than her. Some speculated that one of these men may have become obsessed with her, and that the murder was the result of an emotionally charged confrontation. A particularly popular theory is that Elizabeth was involved in a love triangle in which one of the men she was romantically involved with became jealous or enraged. According to this theory, someone from her past had a motive to kill her, either out of possessiveness, anger, or revenge. However, there is little evidence to support this idea, and no one from Elizabeth's circle of relationships was ever charged with her murder. There are also theories suggesting that Elizabeth was targeted by someone who had a personal vendetta against her, or perhaps by someone she had unknowingly offended or rejected. Another theory is that the killer was a psychopath who became fixated on Elizabeth, perhaps viewing her as an object to be destroyed due to an imagined slight or even a delusional sense of superiority. These types of theories are supported by the brutal nature of the crime, which appeared to be not just a murder, but a highly personal act of violence. Finally, some have considered the possibility that Elizabeth's death was the work of a serial killer, who may have been responsible for other unsolved murders in Los Angeles during the same time period. Some investigators believed that Elizabeth was just one of a number of victims of a killer who had a pattern of targeting women. but this theory has not been substantiated with any concrete evidence. The idea of a serial killer remained in the realm of speculation, as other murders in the area did not share the same distinctive characteristics of the Black Dahlia case. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged about the motive behind the brutal murder of Elizabeth Short, but none have been conclusively proven. One popular theory suggests her death was linked to her connections within Hollywood's elite. Elizabeth had been romantically involved with wealthy men, and some believe one of them may have killed her to keep a secret hidden, perhaps an affair or scandal that threatened their public image. The violent and calculated nature of the murder, including the way her body was disposed of, leads some to think the killer was trying to silence her. Another theory proposes that Elizabeth was the victim of an obsessed man. Some believe she had a relationship with someone who became fixated on her. When she either rejected him or threatened to expose their affair, the man became enraged. The disfigurement of her face, including the smile carved into her mouth, is sometimes seen as an act of punishment, possibly by someone who couldn't handle the rejection or had a warped sense of love. Another possible explanation is that Elizabeth's murder was part of a larger pattern of killings in Los Angeles. Some theorists suggest she may have been a victim of a serial killer, especially since other unsolved murders in the area around the same time have been speculatively linked. However, no concrete evidence supports the idea of a serial killer at the time, and Elizabeth's case stands apart from the others in key details. Some criminologists believe the murder was deeply personal, driven by an emotional connection, either obsessive love or extreme hatred. The horrific nature of the crime, including the dismemberment and mutilation of her face, suggests that the killer may have been fixated on Elizabeth. The violent and ritualistic aspects of the crime point toward a psychological motivation, where the killer may have seen Elizabeth as an object to punish or destroy. Despite the passage of over 75 years, the Black Dahlia case remains unsolved. The LAPD officially closed the case in 1950 due to a lack of evidence and leads, but the mystery endures. Advances in forensic technology, including DNA testing, have sparked hope that new breakthroughs could solve the case, but no new evidence has surfaced. Books, documentaries, and films continue to explore the case, yet the identity of the killer remains elusive. Some now accept that the truth may never be known, leaving the Black Dahlia as one of the most famous unsolved murders in history. Elizabeth Short's death has become woven into Hollywood lore, symbolizing the dark side of the city's glamorous golden age. While she never achieved the fame she sought, her tragic story and its sensationalized media coverage have made her a household name. The press painted her as both a femme fatale and an innocent victim, contributing to the mysterious allure surrounding her life and death. Elizabeth's case serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame and the exploitation of women in Hollywood, and it continues to resonate as a haunting reminder of ambition, hope, and despair.